This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include political analyst and activist Dan Blue III, syndicated columnist John Hood, NC Policy Watch's Chris Fitzsimon, and Becki Gray from the John Locke Foundation. Well, with the budget passed and signed, lawmakers understandably started looking toward adjournment of this session. This past week, they cleared the decks of a lot of big issues left remaining, and we want to talk about the bond referendum, primary elections, economic development, and Medicaid reform bills they passed. And as always, we'll ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get started. As we said at the beginning, there are several major and lots of other issues to be resolved before the lawmakers can adjourn. Dan Blue, one of the measures combines all of the state's 2016 primary elections into one super primary, March 15th. Now, the supporters of this bill say that it saved the states up to $9 million in expenses, but opponents say it's going to be a circus, and voters will forget state candidates with such a long time between March and November's general elections. Where do you stand on this issue?
I think that having a single primary makes a lot of sense. I wish they thought about that when they passed the legislation to switch the two dates in the first place. What worries me is having a March primary. We're coming right out of the winter, and a large part of the state is still going to be a little cold. It's going to be a little bit different, and I don't think they've prepared for the logistical nightmare that that's going to present.
Becki, some people say that this is nothing more than an incumbent protection plan. You agree with that?
Well, I'm sure that was considered as they talked about when to have that. The General Assembly made this decision, so I'm sure that that was part of the discussion. And, you know, Tom, to your point of perhaps some of the down ballot candidates and issues being ignored, you know, one of the things they're talking about is putting the bond on the March proposal. So there's going to be a lot on that. But I just have confidence in the voters that they can figure this out. And it is a little bit different. It's going to be a long ballot, but I think voters are going to be able to figure this out. I'm not worried about that. But Chris, they're not
going to be able to buy any airtime. The candidates
It's not the voters who aren't going to be figuring it out. It's the people who have thought about running for the General Assembly. The session is going to be over for all intents and purposes the 1st of October. That gives candidates 2 months who had no idea that this was going to happen at all until about 2 weeks ago. So raising money, putting an organization, deciding whether or not you can make the commitment to run for the General Assembly in particular, or Congress. I think this is just nothing but an Incumbent Protection Act. If we're going to have a March primary, we should do it in the 2018 election when people know far in advance. This is clearly an Incumbent Protection Act.
But we wanted to get into that presidential primary race and be able to have some say-so there. But how big a problem is this thing with TV time and the candidates being able to buy enough time, particularly the state candidates? Because the federal candidates are guaranteed airtime, right?
Yes, I think the federal candidates will eat up a lot of the airtime, and people who are in the business confirm that. You know, we've been talking mostly about the Republican presidential race and how this affects the Republican field that's so large, and now it'll be important. I'm not so sure that North Carolina won't end up being really important in the Democratic primary. So that the idea of moving the primary up to March because it would give North Carolinians more say over the presidential nomination, that was the original motivation. It might actually be true. That may happen. Now, is it worth all these other encumbrances? Is it worth affecting the down ballot races? I don't know. But to just discount it and say, well, why are we doing this? Let's do it in May or let's do it in 2018. I understand the argument you're making from the standpoint of state races and so forth, but this does make North Carolina really important in the presidential race, in my opinion.
Although it's interesting, one other quick thing, they're saying now they're moving all of them to save money. Well, they first moved the March primary knowing that it was going to cost more money. So it's like an excuse. They moved one willing to spend the money, and then all of a sudden they're not willing to spend the money, but they want to move all the races. I think it's pretty transparent.
Well, let's talk about the economic development legislation that passed this week. Governor McCrory had said he wanted lawmakers to pass a bill granting new economic incentives within the first 2 weeks of the session. Here we are at the end of September, and it doesn't even contain all the funding the governor wanted. Chris, is there any evidence to suggest that North Carolina really lost any industrial recruitment companies coming to our state because this bill was so late?
No, and that's the frustrating part. Of course, there's no evidence, and what I've always been amazed at is if there is evidence, then I'd like to know what it is, and then we can have that inform the debate. I mean, I think the economic developers clearly think, and the folks at Commerce who are economic developers and private ones say it means we're not in the game and we're not in the conversation. I'm not sure if that's true, but to say that it seems unlikely that that's true, but to say that we're losing specific projects, I think they ought to be able to tell us, okay, a project went to South Carolina. Here's what they got. They wanted this from us and we didn't give it to them, but we've never heard that.
Becki, the House wanted to add a lot more money to these JDIG grants, Job Development Investment Grants, than the Senate did, and the Senate held firm, pretty firm on the amount. What was the Senate's big concern about increasing the JDIG grants? Was it just money?
Well, it's money, and it's also the whole philosophy that you have to bribe companies to come to North Carolina. The Senate and many members of the House agree that the better way to entice businesses to come to North Carolina is to have a well-skilled workforce, to have a strong infrastructure, to have low energy rates, and to have low taxes. Those are the things that businesses are looking for. You know, the incentives are, that you've heard it, the icing on the cake. As you roll back on that and put that icing all over the state and create a fair playing field for everyone, where the government isn't doling out special money for special people, everybody gets to compete for that.
But didn't you find it interesting, Dan, that in the legislation, what they said was the wealthiest counties have got to come up with incentive monies of their own before they can even qualify for the JDIG grants.
That's right. And one of the other interesting things here is the massive disconnect between the governor and his General Assembly, just on how he's going to recruit businesses here. You see it across the board, whether it's going to a wealthy county or one of the more poor counties. It's all across the board. They've got to figure out how they're going to do this.
And a number of Republicans actually voted against this on the floor, John. Why was that?
Because they feel that the right approach to economic development is broad-based tax relief and broad-based services, not picking and choosing and not these carve-outs in the tax code. The governor has enough support in the legislature. That's why he got JDIG expanded. That's what happened. But yes, there are some differences of opinion. In my view, no matter how much we argue against it, no matter how much people on the left or the right complain, there is a strong lobby, a very strong lobby for these corporate welfare programs.
And it's a fact of life.
And so what they ended up doing was expanding it, but at least not by as much as originally proposed.
Yeah, only $5 million a year.
Tom, you mentioned too, something else that really is a concern is the local governments, the counties and the cities now are in this game as well. Yeah. So when you're talking about taxpayer money, this is going more and more for these programs. If not at the state level, we're seeing it at the local level. Really concerning.
Well, we thank you for watching NC Spin on the air or on YouTube. Here's a reminder, there's much more on our website, ncspin.com or NC Spin on Facebook. You'll find video footage not seen anywhere else, perspective pieces from our panel and our weekly column. So get more balanced debate from the Old North State on ncspin.com, NC Spin on Facebook, or on Twitter at NC Spin Tweets. When we come back after these messages, we're going to talk about the bond vote that's coming up.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Phones are getting smarter, cars more efficient, TVs bigger and more stunning. Imagine the same innovation from agriculture. Meet the Plant Sciences Initiative at NC State, a proposed state-of-the-art research complex where world-class researchers will tackle agriculture's toughest challenges, like feeding the world's rapidly growing population while preserving natural resources for future generations. Join Farm Bureau and NC State in moving North Carolina to the forefront of ag research in the world. Visit keepaggrowing.org.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
I'm Linda Loveland. If feeding your family safe, affordable foods is a priority for you, then join me in saying thanks to the North Carolina farmers who feed us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's say thanks to the farmers who feed your family at #ThankNCFarmers. To learn more about the foods we eat and the farm families who feed us, visit feedthedialoguenc.com. And be sure to thank North Carolina farmers.
We now return to NC Spin.
Another of Governor McCrory's priorities was improvement of public infrastructure. The governor originally proposed a $1 billion road bond program along with $2 billion for buildings for colleges, universities, public schools, the National Guard, and museum. The legislature agreed to a $2 billion vote on public buildings without any money for transportation. Becki, what reason was given for not including transportation monies in this vote?
Well, Tom, they figured out another way to pay for it. Rather than borrowing the money to take care of these transportation needs, they have found another way to do it. They have stopped the transfer out of the highway fund, $216 million a year. They've also funded by about, I think, $189 million over 2 years with the STI funding. They've also increased the DMV fees for the first time in a decade, and that generates additional money as well. And also prioritizing the projects by making these by data and, rather than just political favors.
By districts.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the untold stories of this session is the amount of money that has gone towards highway funding. In doing this, they have been able to come up with $1.3 billion over 10 years. So instead of borrowing that money in a bond, they're going to fund it with ongoing fees.
But they say we need $25 billion in transportation.
Over a long period of time. But this gets them there without having to borrow the money in the bonds. That's why they made that decision.
Yeah, all right. Then Senator Bill Rayburn said this was the best bill that 170 people could pass. What do you think he was trying to say to us? That it's that hard getting consensus?
I think it's the sausage-making process. There was probably a lot of arm twisting and a lot of concessions made to get the bill that they were able to pass. So I actually agree with them on that.
John, originally they were talking about putting the bonds on the ballot in November, but they're now moving it to March 15th. What's the rationale behind that?
And you should say they were originally talking about November of 2016.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So the rationale for doing it in November of 2016 is that it would give people more time to learn about the bond, give a bond campaign more time to gel, and that if you did it in March, as we just talked about in the previous segment, any advertising or promotion about the bond will be swallowed up in the presidential race and other primaries. Now, the reason they ended up moving it back into March of 2016 is because those arguments were overwhelmed by two others. One of them was, if we wait longer, the interest rate might be higher and the long-term cost to taxpayers might be higher. And the other one was, don't you think that a 2016 November vote might be swallowed up by the presidential race? So they decided to go ahead and do it in March.
Anyway, all right. So they left out money for public schools, Chris. Why was that? They was originally in the House
I was disappointed
proposal.
in that. It was $500 million with a fund that would work with local governments to build local schools. It is worth noting that the state budget did fund one school and happened to be in the Senate Majority Leader's district of Jones County, $11 million. That was the only school that was built outright, which I thought was very unusual and didn't get enough attention. But I was disappointed they did that. On the other hand, I thought they did improve the bill and build in the university parts and add some colleges.
No, half of it goes to universities.
Colleges and universities, which were left out of the original proposal.
But half of it goes to universities. I mean, here we are talking about how much priority we put on community colleges. The university's got $1 billion and the community colleges got $350 million. What does that say?
Maybe there's more need at the university. That's what they'd have you think. But it was
Brad
interesting
Crone used to say they have bigger shrimp and better ball games to take them to.
There's probably some truth to that. The thing about this bond is that I think is significant is this is addressing long-term needs across the state, and how you divvy that up it's a process. It is the sausage.
But we still don't know what all's going to be involved. I mean, which buildings they're going to do we, John?
Not all, because some of the bond items were specific buildings, and some of them were just amounts per campus or amounts. There's some aspects of the bond. There's some projects on the list that I would not have funded. I still think the bond should be smaller than it is. $2 billion is still a lot better in my mind than $3 billion, and much of it is worth doing. Here's my main point, though. This will be the first time since 2000 that we have had a general obligation bond on the ballot. Now, that's the best thing to say about it, because previous legislatures, previous governors have abused the Constitution. Right. They've evaded the requirement that voters get a say by issuing various kinds of supposedly non-general obligation bonds that everybody knows are essentially backed by the state.
At least we get a voice. And the question,
this is at least a return to constitutional government.
So very quickly, I want a yes or no answer. Can they pass? Will they pass? Dan?
Yes, it's spread out across the state.
I think they'll pass as long as people think these are the projects that will actually be built.
Becki?
Absolutely.
Bonds usually pass unless there is a specific organized opposition. I haven't seen that.
All right. After these messages, we're going to take on Medicaid reform.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
It's a fact. Patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
Opportunity moves at the speed of broadband, but is rural NC stalled at dial-up? Join the conversation. Attend the NC Rural Assembly on September 29th, a discussion on broadband connectivity and rural NC opportunities. Register now at ncruralcenter.org.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, "Come on, we're leaving."
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
Since taking over in 2011, this legislature has been saying Medicaid was broken and they wanted to fix it, but the Senate and House had different solutions. Well, this past week, they passed a hybrid Medicaid reform bill that few are completely happy with, but it could accomplish the major goal of making Medicaid budgets more predictable. A compromise bill allowed up to 3 privately owned managed care organizations to be established and up to 10 doctor and hospital provider-led entities to manage the care of 1.9 million residents in our state. The crux of the reform is this. Instead of paying a fee for each doctor or hospital visit, the MCOs or provider-led entities would get a certain amount of money for each patient they serve each month. If the health care costs exceed that amount, the organization pays. If the costs are less, the organization pockets the profits. I want to ask everybody what you like and don't like about this Medicaid compromise. John Hood, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm cautiously optimistic about it. I'd like to see the specifics of how they specify the contracts, both for the regional provider-led entities as well as the 3 managed care companies. This is not as risky as far as adverse selection, because you aren't trying to game the system to just attract people who are healthy and make money on them, because it's a little bit different than that. The patients aren't paying. On the other hand, there are still opportunities for whether it's PLEs or commercial care companies to game the system. So you have to make sure that the patients end up not all clumping in one or the other.
Right. Dan, what do you like and what do you don't like?
I do like that it should give a little bit more predictability to the expenses that we face with that. What dismays me the most about it, however, is that they're creating a division within DHHS, and the employees of that division are going to be exempt from the State Personnel Act.
Interesting. Yeah. Becki, what do you like and what do you don't like?
I like that they're moving forward with it. I like that they're thinking kind of outside the box. 58% of Medicaid patients in the country receive this, per patient payment, or under this, the capitation, right. 38 states have these kind of hybrid systems like we're putting into place. I like that they're moving forward with kind of a North Carolina plan with this. And then, there's some uncertainty with some things. One thing I don't like is that it's going to take so long to put it into place with the federal approval that we have to get and those
We'll talk about that in a second. What do you like and what do you don't like, Chris?
Well, I don't like much about it. I was interested in Representative Nelson Dollar made a very passionate speech against it on the House floor, pointing out a lot of things. One is that the new for-profit middleman that will be now inserted into the process. I'm more worried about how some of these are folks who have some of the most worst disabilities or struggling, are going to have to make choices on their own to try to figure out how we're going to help them make choices if they don't have people do it. I'm worried about the lessons that some for-profit companies will undercut folks for a while and then eventually take over, and where this leads us. And finally, I'm already worried that the new division in the Department of HHS has more power to reduce benefits and other things that the legislature used to have to do itself. So we're ceding some of the power.
Well, that could be good or bad for that matter.
That's right.
Bob Seligson, who's the chief executive of the North Carolina Medical Society, said even though this legislation has passed, this reform bill, the debate's not over with. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, what he means, there's at least three different things. One of them is, as Becki said, you got to go through a federal process to get a waiver to proceed. Now, most states get this. It's not like North Carolina is unlikely to get it, but it is a process. Number two, as I was talking about, you have the actual specification of how these regional entities will be awarded, how the statewide contracts, what will be the qualifications, what will be essentially what they're doing with hybridization here, Tom, is they're allowing the provider groups to get started so they can actually be competitive.
Dan, there's a lot of situations in which these MCOs, these private companies that we're talking about here, will go into states and they'll lowball bid in order to be able to get the contracts, get the business, and then within 2-3 years, they come back saying they ain't making any money, and they hold the state hostage saying either you pay us more money or we're pulling out. That leaves the state in a mess. Is this something we should be concerned about here?
We absolutely should be concerned with it. I haven't seen any provisions there to protect us against it, but a lot of that's going to have to go into the final contracts with these entities.
So I wrote a column this week, and essentially my column said that the bill was not as bad as it could have been, but it wasn't as good as it should have been. Anybody agree or disagree with that?
Nobody in the debate would disagree with it because they all wanted different things. This is inherently a compromise among different plans, different concepts. It's going to evolve over the course of time, but I am, like Becki, I'm glad we've finally gotten something going.
Something going anyway. Okay, after these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Hey everyone, I'm Linda Loveland. If feeding your family safe, affordable foods is a priority for you, then join me in saying thanks to the North Carolina farmers who feed us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's say thanks to the farmers who feed your family at #ThankNCFarmers. To learn more about the foods we eat and the farm families who feed us, visit feedthedialoguenc.com. And be sure to thank North Carolina farmers.
Did you know that 1 in 4 Americans suffer from mental illness? The effects can be devastating. I should know. My father was Robin Williams. I miss my dad every day, but the Foundation of Hope gives hope to me and many others. Mental illness is treatable and will be beatable in our lifetime.
Join us on Sunday, October 11th for the annual Thad and Alice Yule Walk for Hope at the Angus Barn. Great food, prizes, and live music.
Remember, walking together, we are the hope.
Phones are getting smarter, cars more efficient, TVs bigger and more stunning. Imagine the same innovation from agriculture. Meet the Plant Sciences Initiative at NC State, a proposed state-of-the-art research complex where world-class researchers will tackle agriculture's toughest challenges, like feeding the world's rapidly growing population while preserving natural resources for future generations. Join Farm Bureau and NC State in moving North Carolina to the forefront of ag research in the world. Visit keepaggrowing.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
One of the best parts of the show, and what so many of you tell me you like each week, is the part where we ask the panelists to tell us something we don't know. I don't know what it is either, but Chris Fitzsimon, tell us something we don't know.
One of the least discussed parts of the regulatory reform bill, which is just a Christmas tree of everybody who wants to repeal regulations, they put it in a bill, would repeal the electronics recycling program. This is something that took 5 years to get stakeholders, industry people, environmentalists, legislators, community people together. It took them 5 years. They came up with a plan in 2010 to add a small fee to electronics and television sets to recycle them. And the reason to do that isn't just for landfill space. It's because there are toxic chemicals and heavy metals that leach into the soil. Nobody was opposed to this. The industry supported it. The regulatory reform bill, with no notice, with no debate about it, repeals the recycling program for televisions and computers, and for the life of me, I don't understand why we're doing that.
People shouldn't be throwing televisions away anyway, should they? Becki, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, we've talked a lot about the last several weeks on this show about the budget and the specifics of it, teachers' assistants, different line items that people are interested in. But as I kind of step back from it a little bit, there really are three major themes that we see in this that I think says a lot about the priorities of the General Assembly and where they intend to take the state. And there are three R's, if you will. One is restraint in spending. Even with a $450 million surplus, they stuck to a growth in government related to growth of inflation and population, which I think is significant. So again, you're beginning to see that restraint in the growth of government. Also, they have an open government, a reveal, if you will, where there's a transparency provision in the budget that is now law, that we will have an internet portal where all state budget and expenditures will be available online, not only for state agencies, but for cities, counties, and local education agencies. So anybody will be able to go online, we can search it, we can find out where the money's going. And then the third R is reserves, and that's putting money aside, putting money in the savings account for a rainy day, for emergencies, for repairs and renovations, as we were talking about earlier, and building up to $1 billion, that reserve account. So this is a significant difference, I think, in a real theme of where the General Assembly is going.
Dan Blue, tell us something we don't know.
A few months ago, there was a very tragic accident in downtown Raleigh where 3 scaffolding workers fell from a building. The Department of Labor just finished its investigation and is assessing about $160,000 in fines against one of the 3 companies involved. So we now see that they're capable of doing the investigation. The question now turns to the appeals process and to see how much of that fine actually sticks, or whether the company's given incentives and reductions in order to settle it quickly. I'm really curious to see whether they're teeth or not.
Yeah, and what's your prediction?
I think it will fall significantly, if it falls at all, over the next couple of years. But it's going to be a long, drawn-out process.
Interesting. John, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, the Federal Reserve has just updated its analysis of economic momentum in all the states, looking at different parts of the country and how they're doing. Much of the South has cooled off during the last 12 months, but the 2 leaders in the South are the Carolinas, North and South Carolina. They're faster growing than Texas, than Florida, than Georgia. They are the hot spot economically in the southern United States now.
All right. Final question I want to ask each of you. We talked about the legislature and the bills that they've passed and trying to get out of session. House Speaker Tim Moore says they're going to get out prior to October 1st. Everybody concur that's probably going to happen? And if so, what's the next week going to be looking like? It's going to be crazy?
Oh, yeah. They've still got a lot to do. They're going to finish up this week and then coming back on Monday. Well, they're saying, but and coming back on Monday. I think Monday and Tuesday are going to be pretty wild.
Here's what to look for. One of the least transparent times of a very untransparent, if that's a word, legislature. They're already spent last week taking bills totally unrelated, gutting them, replacing them with no notice. That's going to happen over and over the last couple of days.
All right. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback and read our weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when our good friend Doug Raymond will be sitting in this seat. But NC Spin will have more balanced debate for the old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.